Caleb is here. I'll just go to Caleb. My man, I didn't even know you were here. I didn't even hear the bloop bloop. Usually I get a indicator that the person showed up. How you doing, Caleb? You doing all right?
I'm great. How about yourself?
I am doing great. How do you feel? Do you feel better?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, last week I wasn't at the top of my game. I was having a combination of spring allergies and some kind of infection or something. But
Yeah.
I've been back online. I've been streaming. It's good to be here. So yeah. Thanks.
That sucks. I feel you on that. Like I think it was a couple of weeks ago, I got taken down by a cold myself. But Caleb Maupin, he's a speaker, writer, journalist, political analyst, and author. I think I said author. Did I say author the first time? Okay, I don't know. His new book, Caleb, this is no longer a new book, but I will name it just because it's a book of yours, Kamala Harris and the Future of American Politics, an essay in 3 parts, examines the life of Kamala Harris and puts her rise to prominence in the context of changing U.S. political discourse to the geopolitical stage. She failed miserably. So I don't know if I should even name the book. I want to name the book because it's yours. You also have a YouTube channel at this point. I've watched some of your videos. Where can people find you on YouTube?
Yeah, just Caleb Maupin, CalebMaupin. That's my channel, Caleb Maupin TV. I've got a lot of YouTube stuff these days. I'm doing a lot of streams, and my organization is called the Center for Political Innovation, cpiusa.org. We're having a big convention coming up this summer, July 12th, and we're always doing stuff around the country. We had people in the streets just yesterday to support Ibrahim Traore, the leader of Burkina Faso. There was an International Day of Action, and our members were out in the streets in Chicago and in Minneapolis supporting Ibrahim Traore, which was very exciting because, this is the really exciting revolutionary leader in Burkina Faso who's doing a lot to improve people's lives, but facing a lot of attempted assassinations and such.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, lots going on.
Yeah, we covered that story yesterday. He is under massive pressure, to put it mildly. They tried to poison him. They tried to kill him. He is apparently pulling, nationalizing gold mines or mines with the idea of mining gold. And this is going to be under the auspices of effectively the Sahel states, making banks. Like, that's an astonishing thing at the point where you own the money. And that is one of the big issues with Africa, right? It's a rich country. They just don't own the resources because of the colonization. And so he is effectively doing very different things in the way that he's trying to bring those countries out of poverty. So you have my agreement.
Well, I mean, I know he's had a number of really exciting reforms lately. One thing he did is that it is now free to have a baby in Burkina Faso. That any woman who goes to the hospital to deliver a child, no costs. It's all free. He also gave a stipend to all the university students. Anyone who attends university is going to get an official stipend, like a paycheck from the government. Yeah. So they don't have to work at the same time they go to college. They can just focus on going to college because they're getting a paycheck. These are all very exciting reforms, and he's trying to oversee an agricultural boom. You can read an article on our website that one of our members wrote about how he is really trying to expand their food production capacity in Burkina Faso, so they don't have to import their food. They're having just a farming explosion with the help of Russia, teaming up with Russia to make that farming explosion happen. He's a pro-growth, pro-humanity guy, and he's from an interesting background. I guess he went to at his college. He was the leader of the Marxist Student Association, but he's also a Muslim, right? I mean, he's religious. He's a Sunni Muslim, but he's also from the Marxist background, and he sees himself from the tradition of Gaddafi, of Kwame Nkrumah, the African socialist leader of Ghana, and he's a Pan-Africanist. He wants to eventually unify the African countries. Very exciting. I mean, this is a real revolutionary leader in our generation, right? I think it's really exciting to see him there, but it's also a dangerous situation. We know what happened to Patrice Lumumba. We know what happened to Gaddafi. So the fact that he was able to call this global day of action and people on every continent were out in the streets supporting him, I mean, this is really exciting.
Wow, he's fantastic. I mean, he really is. He's been doing a lot of good things. I want to talk about the mineral deal with you. You and I have had this conversation about Donald Trump and this notion of whether or not this idea of when Trump does something good, be perfectly fine with giving him credit for doing something good, especially if his objective is to end the war. Now, when he was running, he said, I'm going to end it in 24 hours. I don't think anybody really believed that. But fair enough. We are 100 days in. And he seems to be looking for every financial advantage and financial domination that he can get his hands on, as opposed to doing the job of just ending the war. And he also doesn't seem to understand the war from the Russian perspective, that it's existential, that you guys have effectively lied multiple times. And on top of lying multiple times, used it to take advantage where you were, as the US, killing Russians. I mean, let's be honest, for all intents and purposes, you had Americans on the ground. Americans were directing where the guns were being fired. They were putting money into it. They were using intel. Yes, the other groups in regards to other NATO nations, but the fact that all of those nations are terrified that Trump is going to walk gets across the significance of the US presence in regards to the war. And it just came out that Trump has signed a mineral deal, which has ensconced him that much more into Ukraine. Now, no, there are no security guarantees in the deal. And just because they signed a deal doesn't mean that Trump implicitly is going to send the US military in to fight for, Ukrainian territory. But it ignores the Steve Bannon approach of walk the F away and instead getting more involved in the conflict. Give me your take on this. I mean, how do you see it? I mean, look, I was hopeful that Trump would either walk away or just come up with some kind of reasonable deal that the Russians may accept. Up to this point, that has not been the case.
Well, I think it's a good sign that the mineral deal finally went through. I mean, they've been talking about it for quite some time, and it is part of the process of ending the war as far as the White House is concerned. That said, this war needs to end. I mean, Trump said he would do it within 24 hours of getting into office. It's been over 100 days. And like the whole world is waiting. People are dying on the battlefield as we speak. And it goes to show you that, I mean, it's really not about who's the president. There are much bigger forces at play here. I did appreciate what J.D. Vance recently said, which was, I mean, he was basically saying it to the other forces within the power structure. And he said, there's this idea that Russia is going to collapse economically if we just continue this war long enough. He says that's not going to happen. Well, that's good that he said that. And it's also good that he's acknowledging that that was the idea from the beginning, right? I mean, this was just yet another version of the Afghan trap, where they created a situation where Russia felt it had no choice. It has to go in and protect the peoples of the Donbas region. And so Russia, that held off for 8 years, finally had to move in and protect folks. They were facing a threat. They were watching, the ongoing killing of the people. And, they've got a monument to all the children who've been killed called the Alley of Angels. Like, people were dying for 8 years straight in Ukraine. And Russia ultimately had no choice, but they've gone in and I guess the United States was hoping to use Russia's, special military operation, just economically isolate and demolish Russia. This is about hurting Russia. It's not about protecting Ukraine. It's about hurting Russia. But J.D. Vance seems to be the voice of reason, saying, maybe that's what we wanted to do from the beginning. We were going to use this to just economically demolish Russia, but Russia is not going to be economically demolished. That's not going to happen. And that's part of the motivation, it seems, for some forces being willing to agree to a peace deal, is that kind of recognizing that the strategy of isolating Russia has failed. So, I would like to see an agreement. I will say Trump is floundering right now. And I am, wildly disappointed in a lot of things that Trump is doing. I mean, the El Salvador stuff is sickening and horrendous. The way he's targeting pro-Palestine students, he ran on a platform of free speech, and now people are getting kicked out of the country for their free speech. So there's plenty that we can, I mean, Trump is doing a lot of things I really don't like. That said, I still think we're better off than we would have been with Kamala Harris. We're negotiating with Iran right now. Biden said he was going to start negotiating with Iran, and he never did it. Well, it seems that now the USA and Iran are negotiating. There was a 30-day ceasefire in Gaza, and it looks like Donald Trump is, to some degree or other, serious that he wants to end this war. He needs to go ahead and do it. And I will say, if he goes ahead and does it, that would be a good win for him right now, because he's floundering in the polls. I mean, Americans are just not happy. He's not doing well as far as Americans are concerned. The economy is not doing well. He ran on a platform of fixing inflation, and then his tariffs, we got inflation here. I mean, he's really not delivering in a lot of ways. I appreciated how he came forward and said that with Pam Bondi, they weren't going to use the Foreign Agents Registration Act to persecute Americans any longer. That was certainly a good thing that Trump did. And I like seeing the FBI and USAID reined in, but we really haven't seen many wins or many achievements for the Trump administration. So let's hope that ending this war, which it could be, could be days away. I mean, we've been hearing that for quite some time, but we're very close to seeing this war end. We've now got the mineral deal that was a big part of the process, right? Which they've been talking about for months. So now that deal is done. Let's hope that this war just comes to an end, and that then Trump can finally do something he said he was going to do. He can have a win other than going after immigrants. I don't think going after immigrants is a win, but it's something he can say, oh, I said I was going to do it, I'm doing it. Well, yeah, you're doing it, and it's not really working out too great. And, it's not something that I think is really benefiting American communities. That is something you said you're going to do, but you did say you're going to end the Ukraine war. So end it. And also, let me point out, so now at this point, Russia and North Korea are militarily cooperating, right? So I guess there was some dispute. At first, the USA was accusing Russia of having North Korean troops. And then regardless, now Russia and North Korea are allies on the battlefield in Ukraine. So as we're negotiating an end to the war in Ukraine, Trump has announced they also plan to resume North Korea talks, and talks on the Korean Peninsula. That's great. Donald Trump, these are two wins that Trump can have. He can end the war in Ukraine. He can go back to North Korea and start the peace process with Kim Jong-un again. Do it. If he wants to turn himself around in the polls, that's what he ought to do, because he's not doing too well right now. I'll just be honest with you. To be fair, he doesn't have to do well right now. And I think Trump is extremely poll conscious, right? And that, there's not an election coming up. It's, midterms are still a year away. So maybe he's thinking about, okay, I don't have to pull out. I can pull out my wins closer to the voting time. But yeah, that's kind of the way I see it. This tariffs, and Trump's not doing too great right now. This is not a great time for the White House. But there you go. Oh, you're muted.
A few things. The North Korean troops are not in Ukraine. They're in Russia. They were in Kursk based on the security agreement that they signed with Russia. So they weren't fighting in Ukraine. They were fighting in Russian territory. Yeah. On the other front, in the war, how do you do that short of just walk away? And he doesn't seem to want to do that. I don't see how the mineral deal gets you closer to ending the war. The mineral deal is just Donald Trump colonizing Ukraine. I don't know what that does in regards to ending the war. If you want to end the war, Putin has said, here are my demands. The loser doesn't get to dictate terms. And Donald Trump doesn't seem, and people around him, doesn't seem to be able to countenance this notion that the U.S. lost. J.D. Vance gets it on some level. Trump gets it implicitly when he says, if this keeps going, Russia's going to take all of Ukraine. I don't know how the mineral deal does any of that. I do see how Trump could go and make a legitimate deal. But the deal he put forth was that the U.S. gets control of Zaporozhye nuclear power plant, which is just outrageous. Under Russian law, all of that territory belongs to Russia. And so Russian demand is, if you want a ceasefire, fair enough, we'll give you the ceasefire, but no more intelligence, no more raising a military, no more weapons coming from the UK or France. And these are rational acts, because up to this point, even with the Minsk agreements that were signed by all of these other countries, they just used it to build a huge military. So if they're saying, we are willing to have talks, Zelensky can't have talks from a law that he put into place that prevented anybody from Ukraine having talks with Russia. So there's that needs to be removed. Two, this idea that we're going to unconditionally stop when we are pressing on the battlefield on all fronts in order to give you time to re-up, reload, drag more conscripts and throw them into the battle. It's nonsense. We're not going to allow that. Trump doesn't seem to get any of that in the deals or nonsense stuff that he's sending Witkoff over in order to offer the Russians. So when you said he can end it, what do you mean? How do you mean he can end it? Does just walk and let Ukraine collapse on the battlefield? Offer a deal that it's legitimate in some way that the Russians can accept? what do you mean? How can he end it? Is what I'm trying to get at. I don't understand how he just snaps his finger and calls it a day.
Well, they have to sign an agreement with Russia, and they have to cut off any U.S. aid, and they have to lift the sanctions. I mean, what I'm hearing in the media is a little odd. So I guess there was all this anger that the agreement was going to recognize Crimea as being part of Russia, and I'm thinking, like, Crimea has been part of Russia since 2014. I mean, this is like, that's a done deal. I mean, the real issue at hand in the negotiations is kind of like what you're pointing out. Where is the border going to be, in the new republics, right? I mean, that is the real crux of the issue. That's where Ukraine and Russia have their really serious disagreement. Yeah, there are a lot of hardcore fanatics and people who, follow Western media who insist Crimea is part of Ukraine, but in reality, Crimea is not part of Ukraine, and it's not going to be. And there's even before, the vote in 2014, there was a huge Russian military base there. The idea, I mean, Crimea, that's a done deal. That's over. That's been over for a long time. The real issue is what's going on in the new republics.
Yeah.
That was an odd diversion that I thought the media was on. But yeah, there's going to have to be a new border drawn to some degree. And I also wonder, like, is this going to be like one of those like frozen conflicts? Is it going to be like a situation because there are quite a few places, and this is not widely known, there are quite a few places across the former Soviet Union where there are disputed borders. There's South Ossetia, which, is, technically part of Georgia, but doesn't recognize the Georgian government, is sympathetic to Russia. There are, there are disputed borders throughout the former USSR where, Russia and its allies are on one side and the West is on another and such. So, I mean, is this going to be like that? Is it going to be that kind of situation where Ukraine, claims that, it has the new republics and there's seats in the Ukrainian parliament representing the Donetsk and Lugansk, but yet, the official border is drawn here. I mean, how is this going to go? Right. I think the idea, though, if there's going to be a treaty, the idea of a treaty is that there will be an agreement by all parties. The Korean Peninsula is a great example. There's no treaty on the Korean Peninsula. There are two governments that claim ownership of the entire Korean Peninsula. The government of North Korea is not North Korea. It's the Democratic People's Republic of Korea. They consider themselves the government of all of Korea. And in South Korea, they're not South Korea, they're Republic of Korea. And they consider themselves to be the legitimate government of all of Korea. And there's never been a treaty or an agreement between the two countries about, that the 38th parallel that goes through the Korean Peninsula is not a border. It's just a military armistice. There was a war that happened, and the war ended frozen. I mean, there was an armistice, but there was never an agreement. And so there's not two countries on the Korean Peninsula. There's one country, and there's, that's contending for power, with two governments that claim it. I mean, the government on Taiwan, what is it legally called? It's called the Republic of China. And and they consider themselves to be the legit government of the entire, Chinese mainland. However, the USA withdrew its recognition, recognizes the government on the mainland. And then there's, you have the Taiwan separatists, the people that say, well, we just want to be Taiwan. We don't want to be we don't want to be China anymore. But overall, there is disagreement there. And I wonder, is that going to be the situation here? Is it going to be that Ukraine just doesn't recognize the reality that the new republics are Russia at this point? They're part of Russia. They voted to join with Russia. The Ukrainian government bombed them and just attacked them for 8 years. And now they're there, and they've become the new republics of Russia. And is that going to be something that Ukraine doesn't have to recognize as part of the peace agreement, or does recognize? I mean, how does that work? But if we're serious, at the end of the day, if we're serious, this war can end. there are some forces that just don't want it to end. And that's what's becoming very, very clear here, is that there's a lot invested here, and there's a lot bigger forces here than simply Donald Trump's personal will. I mean, there's a lot of money on the line, and et cetera. I mean, the whole mineral thing, that's a weird aspect of the Trump administration. Do you remember when he was running the first time, he was complaining that the USA didn't get Iraq's oil? And he said, "Oh, it's like, at least we should have at least gotten the oil." I mean, that whole thing was very, very odd. And it was almost like, it would have been worth invading Iraq if we'd ended up getting the oil. And I mean, a lot of people have pointed out what was there for the U.S. in Iraq, right, it wasn't like a war of plunder, like they're going to get the oil. It was that Iraq was a major oil exporting country that was a competitor on the international markets. All kinds of people were buying oil from Iraq and its state-run oil company, and not buying it from U.S. Controlled and dominated Saudi Arabia, not buying it from BP and Chevron and ExxonMobil. And then Iraq was destroyed by shock and awe. And now whatever oil they have, their exports are very low. I mean, it's about 10% of what it once was under Saddam Hussein. Wow. I mean, they're just not selling oil, right? So it's like, yeah, so maybe the little bit of oil that they are selling now, they're selling to China or something. But that's not the point. The point is that a major competitor with Wall Street was destroyed. And the same for Libya. I mean, Libya, used to be a major oil exporting country. And then after the overthrow of Gaddafi, yeah, they're selling a little bit of oil, but not very much. They've been blown to bits. And now they're exporting like maybe 10% of the amount of oil they were exporting before. So it's not about like going there and getting their stuff. It's about removing a competitor from the market. If you have a business, if you have a bicycle shop and there's a bicycle shop across the street, do you want to go there and take it over and have two bicycle shops? No, you just want to blow it up, and then everyone has to buy from you. You don't need two bicycle shops. That's an expense to maintain. And I think that's kind of how people were not understanding it. I remember after the U.S. invasion of Iraq, the gas prices in America went through the roof, and all kinds of people were saying to me, "Well, Caleb, I thought we were going there to get their oil, and now the gas prices through the roof." Well, I look back on that now. I know what was happening was the gas prices were through the roof because a major oil exporting country was blown to bits and destroyed, and it drove up the oil prices to the highest they'd been. And all the people that used to buy their oil from Iraq now had to buy it from us, and that was a great perfect storm situation. So the idea, like, well, at least we got something, we got their minerals, like, that's just a very odd way of framing it.
Yeah, it's just the way he thinks. Like, in his mind, it's, well, they need to pay us back. That's the way he thinks about it. Not in this kind of geopolitical thing of, okay, well, we want to go after Russia, and this is our, long, our Cold War enemy that now we have an opportunity where we can use a proxy to do it. In his mind, it's, what can we get out of it? He doesn't think in these, I don't think he thinks in these kind of large geopolitical, like, for example, Joe Biden. People used to say Joe Biden was out of his mind. And I would agree with them, but I would point out from a foreign policy sense, Joe Biden was a neocon, and Joe Biden had a very clear understanding of, we need to take down Russia if we can take down Russia. We need to expand NATO. We need to expand it to the border. We need to invite them into NATO if they can get into NATO. It will take a test of strength from Ukraine, and if Ukraine can win, we'll have a NATO country with a massive military on the border of Russia that hates their guts because they're effectively powered by Nazis. Like, that was the way Joe Biden was thinking about it. That's the way many of the Europeans thought about it. I don't think Trump thinks it in those terms like that. I think he thinks, why are we there? And if we're there, might as well get something out of it. Right. Like, it may be a simplistic way to look at it, but I think that's the way he looks at it.
Yeah, it's kind of this crude nationalism. And this is also, I think the mineral deal is something that Trump can show to his supporters to get them to say it's okay to sign a peace deal with Russia. Okay, well, he got us the minerals. So, all right, well, we got something out of it. It wasn't a total, and he made sure Ukraine had to sign over. It's a lot of grandstanding. And a lot of what the Trump administration does, I feel like, is they're trying to please multiple people at the same time, right? So, I mean, it's kind of like with the Middle East, the USA is negotiating with Iran. Israel certainly doesn't want that. But yet they're deporting these pro-Palestine students, and they're, having the FBI go after them. And again, that's something Trump can say, well, I went after them, under Joe Biden, they were protesting at Harvard, but now I'm doing all of this. So then that gives him the ability to negotiate with Iran. Right. And it's like, there's a lot of like, I'll do something kind of theatrical that will please certain people while I do something else that may not be as popular with those people, but then they can't complain about it because I did this other thing or say, there's a lot of that going on. There is also an element of, he's trying to appease people who think in a certain way. I remember when I was, years ago, I was protesting. We had an anti-war demonstration at Times Square, and there was a young kid who had just enlisted in the U.S. military at the time, and he came over and he was arguing with us, and he was saying the USA is not imperialist. He was saying, but we should be. Right, because there's too many poor people here, and we need to just, we send our military all over the world. We need to, get stuff when we go invade country, and his town was poor and all of that. And he wishes the USA was imperialist, but we're just too nice. Our military is just this. We're just going around rescuing people and all that. But we should be imperialist, so people from small towns like his in Pennsylvania could get more money. Well, it's kind of tragic that he feels that way, but it's like, well, we're not going around. The U.S. military is not a humanitarian organization that's going around helping people. But that's the way it's framed. But it's not helping people in small towns like his. It's helping Wall Street bankers. It's helping Wall Street maintain their control of the world. And so he's confused, right? Because he's like, he's saying, I'm getting my people, my community is getting poorer in Pennsylvania. But yet, we're all over the world, and it must be that we're just not being imperialist enough, right? And there's a certain way that people are being trained to think about things, and I think that Trump is kind of playing into that mindset a little bit as well, and that's a little bit dangerous. But again, it is a pushback against the liberal humanitarian rhetoric that's a cover for U.S. wars, right? I've heard people, we're always told these wars, we're sending weapons to Ukraine and we're sending troops to Afghanistan and all that because we just want to help these people. And you do have a layer of low income, white working class people that are like, well, damn it, help us for a minute, help us, do something for us, right? And so
they're not wrong for that.
Yeah, right. They're wrong to think that we're doing what we're doing around the world as a humanitarian operation. They're wrong to think that. But then it's like, well, that we should do it in a way that is more economically plundering rather than this humanitarian stuff. And this is kind of an aspect of right-wing rhetoric that is interesting, and it's tragic, and it's confused, and it's incorrect. But there is an understanding that our communities in the United States are not benefiting from these wars. But there's a confused belief that somehow, like, is this mineral deal going to make our lives better as Americans? No. Are we getting anything from this? But I think there's people in Trump's camp who think we are, and they're like, okay, well, Biden was just giving them weapons, but now Trump is making them give over their minerals. All right, he's art of the deal. He's fighting for us. It's like, no, he's not really fighting for us. We're not getting anything out of it. Really, very few Americans are going to economically benefit from this mineral deal. Yeah.
It's like a very small percentage at the very top that is going to be like investors and those type of things that are going to be able to, effectively colonize Ukraine. UK also has a deal with them, meaning Zelensky is selling out. That's the wild part, right? Andre was on the show. Andre is Ukrainian. And he points out, it's kind of like, so Zelensky is selling out Ukraine. It's not just minerals. Oil, gas, anything that you can pull out of the ground effectively, indefinitely, in order to maintain a war that the majority of Ukraine doesn't even want, and is willing to make territorial concessions if it means stopping the war. That is mind-blowing, right? Basically, people are getting rich off of maintaining a war that we are losing and that we have fundamentally lost, and that the majority of the public doesn't even want to keep going. That's just heartbreaking, to put it mildly. I want to move to Iran for a bit, because you mentioned Iran, and I want to get your take on what you think is going on in the negotiations with that. But before I let this one go, are you optimistic that he is flexible enough to get a deal with Russia? Because keep in mind, Zelensky seemed to have gone rogue. The UK and EU are fundamentally delusional, and they are living up their delusion. And even if I accept that Trump may want a deal, I think what Trump wants is a frozen conflict. And the problem with a frozen conflict is you can come back around to it later. It's like, we're going to freeze this the way it is. And then at a later date, when Europe has built up its forces, however long that takes. That's assuming that even happens, right? Europe is a basket case right now. or a new administration comes in, we may reinvigorate this conflict. I mean, the people in Ukraine, they're not talking about this in the sense of let's make a deal. They're talking about it as a temporary ceasefire. Effectively, we will reinvigorate this. We will get our lands back. We will attack Russia at some point. That's the way they're talking about it. If you're talking about Klitschko and some of these other goons that are in Ukraine, they're not looking at this as a settlement in a way that Trump is talking about it.
Well, I see a lot of signs that indicate that the fighting in Ukraine is going to stop, and that the terms of that are just what's being worked out right now. But yet, I also am seeing a lot of stalling. It's been a while, and this war has been so close to ending for so long. And on the one hand, I hope that we can just have an agreement, and I hope that Trump has enough independence to do that, and I hope that Zelensky is kind of forced to go along with it, and that we can see a de-escalation. But I also am disturbed that it's taking so long, and I'm perplexed about aspects of. I mean, there's certain issues that really do need to be discussed that don't involve Crimea, that don't involve sanctions being lifted, that really involve borders, and I'm not seeing that coming up in the discussion, and that's really the point of contention. So I honestly don't know. If we're not able to see the war end, I will say that will be an absolute disaster. Not for Russia. Russia can keep going, and that they've made that clear. Russia can keep going. It'll be a disaster for those of us in the Western world that want peace, and it'll be a big failure for the Trump administration. If Trump can't have the win of ending this war, I mean, he's going to have very little to hang his hat on. This is a win that Trump needs politically. That represents the majority opinion of the American people, but it puts Trump at odds with the power structure in Washington. I mean, that there is, commitment to opposition to Russia is like an industry in America. And if Trump is not able to override the hate Russia industry and just make this deal, I think Trump will have had a major, major loss.
And by the way, to his base also, his base is sick of it. When this first happened, when Trump first got in, and Steve Bannon, I think he was talking to Michael Tracy, and Steve Bannon was like, walk the F away. He said, just leave. He said, don't do an investigation. Don't do nothing. Just walk. I don't care if you look into any crimes or anything like that. I don't, just walk. Leave it. Joe Biden's war. Call it that and walk away. And Trump didn't listen. And instead, he's like, I want to get a deal. What he heard was, oh, I can get a mineral deal? You give me minerals? Oh, okay. Let's make a deal. That's what he heard. Hence the mineral deal, in which case you get this kind of vulgar, gangsterism where he's like, what can I get out of this? It's just wild. Witkoff, I would tell you this. When Witkoff came back and was on Sean Hannity, he was so optimistic. It was infectious. Like Witkoff was talking about like European security going for the foreseeable future, and we're going to have trillions of dollars of entanglements, economic entanglements that's going to bring a new relationship between America and, I mean, he was all over the place. And now, not so much. Not so much. It's just fascinating. I want to go to Iran. What do you think is happening with that Iran deal? There are two strands of thought. One strand of thought is that the United States is negotiating with a position that it knows Iran can't accept in order to come back later and say, well, we tried to negotiate, but they wouldn't accept our terms. We were being reasonable. And so now we're stuck with having to attack Iran, unprovoked attack on another country. Or do you think Witkoff is an honest actor in that negotiation? Meaning he sidelines the hawks, the neocons, the whack jobs. He sent Witkoff, who's supposed to be a realist, in order to have a negotiation with the idea of trying to actually get a deal, because he knows that all of these other lunatics are in his flanks and pushing him to actually attack Iran. Which one do you think it is?
Well, having been to Iran a number of times, I see that there are multiple entities at play here. I tell people that Iran, in my assessment, having been there, having talked to people, is about a third in terms of the population. First, you have a layer of people that are quite wealthy, that go to the neighborhoods of northern Tehran and such. And there's a layer of people who don't support the Islamic Republic and think that the Islamic Republic is not helpful, that kind of resent it, consider it to be authoritarian, are kind of in love with America, watch American propaganda. That's about a third of the country. Then you've got a layer of people in the country that think the Islamic Republic has done some good things. You know, it's industrialized, it's opposing Israel, it's, you know, it's made Iran a stronger country, etc. They're not fully on board with exactly everything the supreme leader talks about, but they think, you know, they've done some good things, and you know, it's about a third of the country. They're mildly sympathetic to the Iranian government, but they also, maybe they listen to American propaganda, maybe they criticize different things, maybe they wish they had more civil liberties or whatever, but they're more solidly with the government. And then you have a layer of people that are all in, that are, you know, dedicated. And, you know, the biggest economic entity in Iran is the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, which is a military organization that is accountable only to the supreme leader, not the elected, you know, parliament, not the government of Iran. You have people in Iran who are ready to die. I mean, Shia Islam really emphasizes martyrdom and the willingness to die for the oppressed on the battlefield, and the kind of social justice, anti-imperialist goals and principles of the Islamic Revolution. And you have a third of people that are really revolutionary, that are, you know, loyal to the Islamic Republic and are very much invested in international stuff, whether it's the war in Yemen. They see the Houthis as great heroes, whether it's Hezbollah in Lebanon, whether it's, you know, rallying against Israel and mobilizing against Israel. The last Friday of Ramadan was declared by Khomeini to be the day of Al-Quds, where the Muslims of the world would rally to eventually retake Jerusalem from Israel. And that there's a third of the people in the country that are very much, you know, fanatical and dedicated to the principles of the Republic. And what I see here is that on the one hand, right, Iran overall, as a matter of pride, has the right to peaceful nuclear energy. As, you know, participants of the Non-Proliferation Treaty, they have the right to peaceful nuclear energy. They made huge concessions, basically giving up their peaceful nuclear energy program in 2015 as part of the Iran nuclear deal. And as a result, they didn't really benefit economically. And then, you know, Qasem Soleimani, their national hero, was killed, and all of that. And that, so on the one hand, you have overall Iranian society that is negotiating the terms of how much of a peaceful nuclear energy program will they have. That seems to be what they're negotiating with the United States. How much of a peaceful nuclear energy program are we going to have? Since we're allowed to have it, but how much of it are we going to have? And then on the other hand, you have Pete Hegseth and others that are just furious because the Houthis are kicking ass. And I mean, the Houthis are kicking ass. I mean, and U.S. battleships are leaving the region because they're so devastated by Houthi attacks, you know, and that the Ansar Allah movement that's inspired by the Islamic Revolution of Iran, which is based on Shia Islamic revolutionary principles, that very much is kind of an extension of that Islamic revolutionary spirit of Khomeini and others. They are like a force to be reckoned with that has, you know, stopped ships and brought Israel to its knees in a lot of ways, and is just shaking the whole world. And so on the one hand, they want to negotiate with, you know, just Iran, but they have to negotiate with a big section of Iran, which is this, you know, revolutionary foreign policy, Islamic Revolutionary Guard faction that the Houthis very much are tied in with, and that they don't like the Houthis, and they are angry about what the Houthis are doing, and it's a big mess. And this was a big point of disagreement in the original Iran nuclear deal in 2015. The reason it took so long is because the USA really, really wanted that the Iran nuclear deal would restrict to some degree or other the Iran's support for Hezbollah, Iran's support for the movement in Bahrain. The Shia majority of Bahrain would like to have a Shia government in Bahrain, but they have a Sunni king imposed on them by Saudi Arabia. They don't have democracy in Bahrain, and that to restrict Iran's kind of revolutionary, foreign policy and the Islamic Revolutionary Guards and et cetera. And Javid Zarif just made clear in the negotiating table with John Kerry, look, I can't control those people. They're above me. I'm Representative Javid Zarif, who was negotiating. He was a representative of the president of Iran at that point. It was Rouhani, and he said, I can't sign an agreement that those people will stop their activities in Yemen, or those people will stop their activities in Lebanon or whatever. I can't do that because they're not under my jurisdiction. They're above me. They're loyal to the supreme leader, and they are this entity that is really, they're not even, they don't even really consider themselves to be Iranian, right? They're global, and they're dedicated to anti-imperialist principles and a kind of global revolutionary perspective, and that Javid Zarif was just not able to make some kind of agreement with the Obama administration that, okay, we'll restrict them from going here or there. He can't do that. And so Pete Hegseth is angry at the Houthis, is angry at Iran for supporting the Houthis, but the negotiations that Witkoff is engaging with are with forces that really don't have the ability to rein in that support. That is an entity that is kind of beyond what the elected president and the elected administration can do. I mean, that's above them, and it's almost like a separate entity. And I guess that's kind of hard to understand, but it's like, in the USA, yeah, if you negotiate with USA, the US Marines and the US Navy and all of that is who you're negotiating with. In Iran, it's not like that. In Iran, if you're negotiating with the elected government about what kind of nuclear power plants they can have, that's very different than what the Islamic Revolutionary Guards are doing, and what the global anti-imperialist movement that's based in Iran is doing. That's not the same entity, and I think that's the issue in these negotiations that a lot of folks are not really understanding.
From my understanding, initially Witkoff came back and sounded very similar to Arghachi, foreign minister of Iran. I'm maybe mispronouncing his name. Both of them sounded like they were talking about nuclear energy. Iran has said flat out, we are not getting rid of our enrichment program. It is our right as a sovereign country, and we're going to keep that right. And initially, it sounded like Witkoff agreed. When he was on Sean Hannity the first time around, both were talking about 3.6% enrichment. All right, no issue. Then Witkoff gets attacked. Now, Witkoff has been getting attacked the entire way through. They've called him a Russian bot. His perspective is like he's a Putin puppet. They call him weak on the issue of Iran. And after getting attacked, he comes back out, puts out a tweet, and the tweet effectively says, look, this is going to be a Trump deal. The deal is going to be what the president wants, etc. Witkoff starts to talk less, and Rubio starts to talk, which, from my point of view, like, oh God, now Rubio is piping up, meaning the edifice that was sidelined at one point is now in pictures with Donald Trump, and is now making statements saying they need to get rid of their entire enrichment program, which from right off the bat, it was understood was a red line. That was something Iran said we're not going to do. So after getting pressure from, let's say, the neocons, the hawks in the administration, Donald Trump upped his demands on Witkoff in those negotiations and sends, what is the guy named Michael Anton, another hawk, in order to be the person dealing with the technical details of the program. As they point out, the third negotiation was far more tense than the other two negotiations, because what the U.S. was asking for was something that was a red line that Iran had already said from the very beginning, off the table. And so I guess my thing is this a situation where Trump, his instincts might have been, I want to get a deal. And so I'm sitting near the guy who I think can actually get me a deal. And then with pressure from people around him, pushing him to go further with maximalist demands, in this case, the Libyan model, in the way that Netanyahu pointed out. And look, let's be honest, many of the people who are around Trump are pushing him for a war. They want a war. As you pointed out, the blob loves this notion of going to war with Iran. As Wesley Clark said, Iran is the last guy standing. All of the people around Trump are effectively Zionists and fully believe that Iran is the last man standing. Netanyahu has taken this opportunity, believing this is our shot. We got the president that we wanted. We're going to go for it, with the belief that Trump is the guy who's going to deliver it. Now, Trump initially said, I'm rejecting this notion of an attack. We're going to have a negotiation. But there are policy documents that point to a plan just like this. What is it? Pathway to Persia, where they talk about the U.S. needs to negotiate. They need to negotiate to make it look as if they're being legitimate in a negotiation. And then when a negotiation fall apart because the U.S. is asking for something that Iran will not give, that they can now use that as a pretext to attack Iran, saying, hey, we're trying to negotiate in good faith, so now we can attack you, despite the fact that you're not a threat to us. That is the way some people see it. And I got to be honest with you, that is the way I see it, especially until they get a deal and until they come up with something that is less of a red line in what they're pushing for. Initially, I thought, okay, well, Witkoff is a realist. Maybe he's sending a realist, he's sidelining the State Department. But at the point where Rubio starts running his mouth, then I'm like, oh God, Rubio is now the mouthpiece. And if Rubio is the mouthpiece, you effectively have a Zionist neocon warmonger as the mouthpiece for negotiation that is effectively taking place. That's even though Witkoff is the guy who's doing the negotiation, the fact that Rubio is the one that's talking to the press and is the one who's making these statements gives me this impression that that's the plan, that's the policy that Witkoff is now running with. What do you think of that thought? I mean, do you take that as too cynical? Do you take that as, okay, well, that could be legit considering people of policy and the people that Donald Trump have around him are whack jobs? How do you view that take?
Well, I mean, I certainly hope that you're not correct. I really hope we don't attack Iran and go to have a war. And but at the same time, I can see that that certainly, is part of the playbook. If they were planning a war with Iran, they would want to have fake negotiations first, kind of like with Iraq, where they had the inspection team go to Iraq and then, the inspector they were not there to actually look for weapons of mass destruction. They were there to cause trouble, to create a situation where Iraq would expel the weapons and then say, oh, look, but that said, everything I hear from the Trump administration, right? So Trump, he was against the Iran nuclear deal, right? That was the whole thing, right? Oh, Obama sold out to Iran. It was a bad deal. I could make such a better deal. And being against the Iran nuclear deal, all the stuff Trump was repeating about being against the Iran nuclear deal was all bullshit. It was all just, Zionist bullshit that the USA gave Iran the right to have a nuclear bomb. No, they did not. The USA, it was like the way that they were talking about the Iran nuclear deal at the time and the stuff that Trump was repeating and riding on to talk about the Iran nuclear deal was all bullshit. At this point, Witkoff is essentially renegotiating exactly what Obama was negotiating. It's the exact same issue, which is that basically we're going to recognize that Iran has the right to peaceful nuclear energy, but we're going to demand that they get rid of almost all of it, as a favor to us, right? So it's like, okay, you have the right to this, but you only get to do a very, 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 very tiny amount of it. And if we can agree on that, it's like the whole thing, but Trump is grandstanding because he has to, there's a layer of like anti-Democratic Party, anti-Iran, pro-Israel people that Trump is like grandstanding for, right? So there's an element of like Trump grandstanding. And then it's like, well, he's the deal maker. He's the art of the deal. He's going to make a good deal with Iran. But it's the same thing. It's the same thing. And I believe there are people in Trump's camp who don't want a deal to actually work. And I think there are other people in Trump's camp that want Trump to be able to say, well, I made a good deal with Iran. That deal that Obama made was awful, but I made a good deal with Iran. And I will say I am, that whole signal chat thing that was revealed and all of that, it does make me realize that on some degree, I think that as much as that many of the people in the Trump camp are blind supporters of Israel, many of them really hate Iran, etc. I do think for his own reasons, Donald Trump does not want to be remembered as a guy who started a war, as a guy who started a big war. He doesn't want to be remembered that way. It just wouldn't be good for him politically. And that Donald Trump would very much like to find a way that he can get credit internationally and he can make the people who hate Iran very happy and feel like they got what they wanted, but not actually get us into a war with Iran. And so I am confident to some degree that Trump would like to not get into a war with Iran. There are people in his administration that certainly wouldn't mind and would be happy to march us into a war with Iran. I don't think that's necessarily what Trump wants to do, but he has to play a weird game of, it's kind of like with Ukraine where he's tap dancing and he's got to make a lot of different people happy in the process. And how is he going to be able to please the people he needs to please and not actually go to war with Iran. Because if he goes to war with Iran, I mean, the American people don't want that. Polls show the American people just don't want that. I mean, that would be, again, another epic disaster for his administration. He needs to sign an agreement with Russia, and he needs to maneuver this Iran stuff in a way that he can claim that he's, you know, being tough on Iran and he's sticking it to Iran and all that, but not actually go to war. Because if he goes to war, you know, he's, you know, again, that'll be an epic loss for the Trump administration, and it would be World War III. It would be an absolute disaster. I mean, if the USA were to actually go to war with Iran, I mean, that's, that's like an Armageddon scenario. So, you know, he can't actually pursue that, even though there seem to be some nuts in his administration who wouldn't mind.
Caleb, from your mouth to God's ears, I will tell you, my initial impression was, okay, his instincts are not to do that. That was my first impression. But I've seen all of these governments in the Middle East take an L. And so it's like, I can't ignore that in the context of, you know, the people who have around him. I don't know, from your mouth to God's ears, I hope he just, whatever he gets, he comes out and sells it. All right, this is what I got. This is a win. I promised that I was going to do this, and so this is what I've done. And it ends up being like a JCPOA 2.0. Yeah. That's what I hope takes place. Caleb, man, thank you for this. I always appreciate having you on. I really do enjoy these conversations. Yeah. Caleb Maupin, Caleb, and just the name of the organization you are associated with, it's CPI, but can you give the
Center for Political Innovation, cpiusa.org. We're doing great stuff. Our national convention is coming up in Chicago, July 12th. It's going to be a big event. You're invited, of course, Jamarl. I know you may not be able to make it, but you know, you are absolutely invited. And yeah, it's going to be a great gathering opposing imperialism. A lot of people and a lot of exciting things are happening. You know, we're giving out, I have my book about Yemen that I wrote. We're giving out, we have 1,000 copies of this book that we've printed with the poster for our convention on the back that we're giving out, right? So those are being given out all over the Chicago area right now.
Now, what is the name of the book, just so people will know?
Who are the Houthis? What are they fighting for? Yeah, and we're going to pro-Palestine events all over the Chicago area and giving out a special edition of the book with a poster of our upcoming convention on it. Door hanger flyers are going up on doors, and I mean, we're doing a lot of exciting stuff. We're talking with local communities. There's going to be a Shia Muslim speaker. It looks like there's going to be somebody representing the Russian American community of the Chicago area will be speaking at the event. Some musical performers, traditional performers from the Russian American community are going to be performing. And I mean, this event is really turning into something. So, some big name speakers are in the works, not ready to announce yet, but it's going to be something. So if you go to one event this year for anti-imperialism, I would come to our convention, July 12th in Chicago. It's going to be quite a shindig, quite a gathering.
Badass. And just what all this will know, speaker, writer, journalist, political analyst, author, fantastic guests in general, can talk about some of anything. I came across you. I think I was watching your show or something like that. By the way, he's also on YouTube under Caleb Maupin, so you can check him out there. Can talk about pretty much anything. And I was fascinated just listening to you. So, man, thank you. I always appreciate you joining me.
Always a pleasure.